In lesson 3, we will be factoring by grouping. This method is used if you have 4 terms or if you have a quadratic trinomial with the leading coefficient that is not equal to 1, as you will see in the next lesson. First, if we multiply 2 binomials that are not alike and you multiply it all out, there is no 2 terms that can be added together, so you're stuck with 4 terms. Now the result, there is a way to go back and factor and get those 2 brackets again. If you notice that there's a common factor of 2x in the first 2 terms and a common factor of a in the second 2 terms. So that would be your first step. Our first example here is different. So it's 4 terms. The a is common in the first 2 terms. So we would take common factor of a out, and you're left with b plus 4. And the last 2 terms have a common factor of 3. So I kind of grouped it in order. Sometimes you have to change in order, but this order makes sense. And this is the line here where you factor the a out and you factor the 3 out. Now please put a plus here in front of the 3, not a multiply. Okay, now this line is not completely factored. Okay, because you still have a sum. But notice that the bracket is the same. That's your goal. If you don't have the same thing in the bracket, then you'll have to rearrange the terms a bit. Now the bracket is now the factor of this is one term and this is one term because the plus separates the term. So if you take out the common factor of the bracket, you're left with bracket times a is this term here, and the bracket times 3 is the second term here. And now you have 2 brackets multiplied together. So this is completely factored. Okay, so we're going to do a couple of examples and then we'll go on to isolating an unknown. Now, the trick here is to find something common in the first 2 or the second 2. So tip is always look for a common factor first. And if there is nothing really common in the first 2 terms, you might have to rearrange the terms. So for example, 1a. There is something common in the first 2 terms. That would be x squared. In the last 2 terms, there's a common factor of 4. Okay, so I'm not going to rearrange the terms. I'm going to leave it like that. Take out an x squared in the first 2 terms, so you're left with x plus 3. Now the common factor in the last 2 terms is a plus 4, so put plus 4, not a times 4. Okay, and you're left with x plus 3. Now it's the same bracket, so that's what you want, right? If not, you wouldn't be able to continue. So this is the first term, this is the second term. Now the common factor is the bracket. And the bracket times x squared is the first term, and the bracket times plus 4 is the second term. In other words, you're just going to put the term in front of the bracket in the second bracket. That's basically what you're doing. Okay, so let's try the next one. Okay, the first 2 terms, common factor of x. The last 2 terms, no common factor. So I'm going to rearrange the terms, and I'm going to put in the same order as in example 1a. So in order of a degree of x, or the exponent. So we'll put the highest exponent first and then go to x squared, which was a positive, the x term, and the constant term. Okay, so let's do this again. The first 2 terms, common factor of x. The last 2 terms have a common factor of negative 4. You might as well put the negative as well. So did I say x? X squared is the common factor in those two terms. So we'll have x plus 1 remaining. And if you take out the negative 4, okay, you also have x plus 1. Now, a trick here is, let's say you didn't see the negative. Okay, if you had taken out a positive 4, you'd have negative x minus 1, which is a little bit like x plus 1, but with the negative. So you'd have to take out the negative in your next step as well. Okay, so we need the same thing in the bracket, exactly the same sign. So the bracket is common, and you're left with x squared minus 4. Now I hope you can realize that this is not completely factored. The last bracket is a difference of squares. So you have to do it one more time and factor, okay, the difference of squares. Now this is completely factorable. Okay, so before our practice examples, we'll go on to isolating with common factors. Okay, so this is where you have more than one unknown. So your answer won't be a number. Okay, you'll have other variables in the answer. So if we're isolating x here, now I can see an x in this term and in this term. There's also some a's and b's in there. Okay, but if you're isolating x, put every term that has an x in it on the same side. Now it doesn't matter what side. I like to work with positive, so I'm going to put this one on the right side, and the 7, I'll put it with the 10. So we'll have 10 minus 7. I'm going to rewrite that 5bx, and then the plus 2ax is on this side. Okay, now of course the left side is 3. Now I can't add the right side. They are not like terms, but I can take out a common factor of x. And I'm left with 5b plus 2a. So now if I want to isolate x, I divide each side by the bracket. Okay, so dividing this side by the bracket. Okay, you don't really have to write the bracket here. And the right side, the brackets will simplify. Okay, and that is your x. We don't know the values of a and b, but that's okay. We want to find x. Same thing for 2b. However, here we might have to multiply this a in order to group the x terms together. Okay, I'm going to put it in alphabetical order, so that a is going to be sandwiched there between the 2 and the y. Okay, now we're isolating x, not y or a. There's other variables here. So that means that look at the x terms. Okay, they have to be on the same side. Now I'll put it on the left side this time. And take out a common factor of the variable I'm finding. Okay, and the last step is to divide by the bracket. So each side divide by your 1 minus a. Here, I won't write the bracket this time. Okay, and please do not cross out these a's because there are 2 terms in the denominator. Okay, if there was only one term on top and one term on the bottom, then yes, we can simplify the a, but not in this case. It just stays like this. Okay, so the last page, the practice examples, again, you can pause the video and look at the solutions in a minute. Okay, so for a, we don't need to rearrange the terms. Okay, for B, again, we don't need to rearrange the terms. The last two terms has a common factor of -1. Okay, so I'm going to write -1 to get x plus 2 in the bracket. Now this is not completely factored. There's a difference of squares in the last bracket, so factor your difference of squares here. Okay, and for C, okay, that is the answer. D and E, we need to isolate x. So group all x terms together. So we have to first multiply this in. Okay, so notice where your x terms are. Okay, put them on the same side. So this n will go on the other side as negative. Common factor the variable you're trying to isolate. Okay, and the last step should always be divide by the bracket. Now there's a sum in the denominator and the numerator, so you cannot cross out those n's and simplify. Okay, only when it's multiplied, not plus or minus in the middle. Okay, E, we have to expand a bit before isolating x. Okay, now there are 3 x terms. Okay, this has an x in it, and these two as well. So put them on the same side. Okay, before doing a common factor, if you notice, 2 of these terms are actually alike. They are both kx terms, so you can add them together. So you have 2kx plus 1kx, which is 3kx. Now here you have the option to factor the 3 as well, but we're isolating x, so I'll show you, we'll just factor the x out, and you can factor the 3 later. Okay, because now we're dividing by the bracket. And this is acceptable here. If you want to factor some more, you can take the 3 out in the denominator. So this is good as well. Okay, so practice the homework. The next lesson should be a live lesson with a quiz on lessons 1, 2, and 3.